Hey, it's Steve Thomason, and it is February 24th, 2017. This weekend is Transfiguration Sunday, and the Narrative Lectionary calls for us to be preaching through Luke chapter 9, verses 28, all the way through to verse 45. This is my visual commentary where I just want to walk through the text and use pictures to try to explore some ideas. And you'll see that I have also included Luke 9, 21 to 27. I'll explain why in just a minute. First thing I want to do, though, is show you a comparison. When I was approaching the text earlier this week, the first thing I did was I went through and looked at Matthew's version of the Transfiguration story. And this is Mark's version of the story. And then here is our text for today. And I do this, if you've seen some of my other videos, I've done this, and this is really helpful, especially when, like last year, I preached the Transfiguration from Mark, and I don't want to, redo that sermon. And so when you do this kind of a comparison, really interesting things pop up. The green boxes here, as you can see, these green boxes all throughout it, those indicate the words that are either exactly verbatim or super similar. And then I didn't take the time to color code the whole thing because I really only care about Luke in this commentary. But places where it's blank like this, it's either where Matthew and Mark agree or where it's unique to Matthew or to Mark. The blue, this is what it's important for our study today. The blue over here, like this, is what's unique to Luke. So the big observation that we can make visually here are these big gaps in Matthew and Mark, because this section right here is unique to Luke. A couple things that Luke adds. First of all, Luke is the only gospel that says that this is a prayer session. They went up to the mountain to pray, and then, he's transfigured. But notice what Luke does in verse 31 through 32. Two words really pop out at me. First of all, Luke mentions the word glory twice, and then he mentions... he says that when he was with Moses and Elijah, he's looking at his departure. And so what I want to do is switch over to my Logos software, which is my software, Bible software that I prefer. I've been using this since like 1994, so I love it. One of the things that is cool about this software, among many, many things, I did all the color coding in Logos, by the way. Let's look at these two words. First of all, the word glory. A cool thing about Logos is if you turn on this little button right here, it says interlinear. It allows you to click on a word, and it shows you the Greek word as it appears. This line is as it appears in the manuscript, so it's doxe. The lemma, or the root word that you would find in the dictionary, is doxa. And then it gives you a nice transliteration so you can pronounce it if you don't know your Greek letters very well. Doxa. But then if you come up here and if you right mouse click on the word, it brings up this little interface where, again, it has manuscript and lemma. So I'm clicking on lemma doxa. And if you come over here and click Bible word study, it brings up this great interface where you can do all kinds of things. I won't go into all of that. But I just wanted to know, what does the word doxa actually mean? So I'm going to open up the little Kittle and check this out. In the Greek use of the term doxa, it means opinion, as what I think and what others think of me. And oftentimes when we think of the word glory or or doxa, we think of like, oh, this majestic, bright light and all that stuff. But the word doxa actually means to be famous, or to have to have a high opinion, or others have a high opinion of you. So I want to come back to that because I think where I'm going to go with my sermon this weekend is what is glory, and how does Luke deal with this word glory. But the other word that I think is really interesting is this word departure. And you can see down here that the Greek word is actually exodus. And if we open up the Bible word study for that, you can see that in Hebrews 11:22, the word is actually mentioning the exodus of the Israelites. Now, I realize that the word can also mean death. And here in 2 Peter, after my departure, you may be able to, at any time. So I realized that this word could actually have a double meaning, because Moses and Elijah were speaking of Jesus' exodus, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. So interesting observation. I'll come back to that in a minute. But let's go back over here and continue with the visual commentary. So yesterday I spent the afternoon drawing some pictures, and I just wanted to think through the story in pictures. So first of all, the setting is they went up on a mountain, which I think that's important. As I've been studying through Luke this time through this year, the up on a mountain and down to a level place is an important thing, as Luke has this great reversal, right? Where what is high is brought low, and what is low is brought high. We've seen that in some other videos. So I don't think that's an accident here in Luke. So here's the story. About 8 days after Jesus had said some things, which we'll get to in a minute, he took Peter and James up, and they went up to pray. So here we have this prayer meeting. And then, while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Now, what is going on? Why is Jesus transfigured in this way? Well, a lot of commentators try to attach this to Daniel chapter 7, and I think that's a pretty good idea. And so, the prophecies of Daniel, where it talks about the beasts which represent these different world powers, and how the Son of Man and the Ancient of Days would come and overcome those beasts. And here we see in Daniel 7:9 that the Ancient One took his throne, and his clothing was white as snow, and his hair of his head was like pure wool. So I think this transfiguration could very possibly be connecting back to this image of the Son of Man in Daniel. But that's something to think about. And then suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah. So here we have the big M, and over here we have the big E. And, one of the questions that people ask is, how did they know it was Moses and Elijah? I think that's a good question. It's like, did they have a little meet and greet? It's like, Peter, James, and John, here's Moses, here's Elijah, yada, 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 before they pressed the recorder button. But, I don't know. But they obviously knew somehow that this was Moses and Elijah. And here is where we get into Luke's unique description and commentary on this event, where he says they appeared in doxa, and they were speaking of his exodus. And so that's why I've highlighted up here the exodus. And so what I think is possible, right? So who did the very first exodus? Moses, which is the central identity of the people of Israel, that God's deliverance of the people is through the Exodus. And so when Jesus goes to the cross, in Elijah's Exodus was pretty miraculous, because, he went up on the chariot of fire. And so I just wonder if Luke is making a play on this word, that what Jesus is going to accomplish in Jerusalem on the cross is the grand exodus for the world. Just something to think about. Now, the next picture is Peter. He's dumbfounded. He doesn't know what to say. I mean, what would you say if you had just seen your best friend turned into pure white, dazzling, and hanging out with Moses and Elijah? You're like, And he says, let us make 3 dwellings, which is the Greek word skene, which means tent. So Peter's like, hey, let's just pitch a tent, one for each of you, and let's just camp here because this is awesome. I just want to live here. And that's one of the things I think I'm going through in my sermon this weekend is when we think of glory, when we think of what is our goal, like why do we follow this guy named Jesus? Doesn't this seem to be like the thing that we want? Is we want to be on this mountaintop in this majestic glory, hanging out with 2 of the most famous people in our own history. Let's just live here. And as Peter is speaking, he is interrupted by this cloud that overshadows them, and they're terrified by this cloud. I mean, I would be too. So again, this is like a picture of being on the mountain with Moses at the giving of the law, right? Boom, this cloud, and then this voice comes out. I don't know if it sounded like James Earl Jones or not, but he's like, this is my... Now it says in the Luke's version, it says my chosen, but some manuscripts of Luke actually say beloved. Matthew and Mark say beloved. So you can't read this and not tie it back to Jesus' baptism story, right? But, here's something interesting. In Luke's version of the baptism story, the voice speaks directly to Jesus and says, you are my beloved. And here, the voice is speaking to the disciples and saying, this is my beloved son. But the key here is the voice of God says, listen to him. And I wonder if God is saying this because Peter is not listening to him. Peter is confused because Peter wants to live on the mountain. And so that's what led me to want to expand my commentary because, the voice spoke, and after it was gone, Jesus is back to just normal, right? And they're like, what does this mean? And it says they kept silent and they told no one. Why? Because they didn't know what was going on, right? That's what I think. So what is it that Jesus said that God's voice said that they should listen to? So here's why I want to go back to Luke chapter 9, verse 21 to 27. This comes immediately before the Transfiguration story. And you see, Jesus refers to himself again as the Son of Man. Now that in itself is an interesting study. This is Jesus' preferred self-reference. He calls himself the Son of Man. He never calls himself or he doesn't often, if not ever, call himself the Son or the Messiah. He calls himself the Son of Man, which refers both back to the images from Daniel, but also is more of a humble thing, that rather than Son of God, he's the Son of Man. He has taken on our form. Why? So that he must undergo great suffering. So here is where Jesus, you can see I've got this caution sign. He's like, look, I am about to go die. I'm going to be rejected by the elders and be killed, and on the 3rd day be raised. And of course, the disciples, they're clueless. I mean, they have no idea what he's talking about. But then he says even more caution. He says, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. So this is what Jesus said to them. He's like, look, I'm going to die. And if you want to follow me, you will die too. So God says, listen to him. And then immediately following the story, we have this really interesting story, which when you first read it, you're like, why is this story here? Because it's the story of this poor little boy who is possessed by this unclean spirit. Now, the way it's described, the spirit seizes him and he shrieks and convulses and he foams at the mouth. In today's world, we might see this as epilepsy. I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to speak too much about what that is, but it's a terrible situation. And the disciples are trying to cast it out, but they could not do it. And so Jesus says, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and bear with you?" And he's like, "Bring the boy here." And while he was coming, the demon dashed him to the ground. So we have this demon, right? And then Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, and the demon leaves. Now, here's what I think is really interesting. The only character in this story who's actually listening to Jesus is the demon, the unclean spirit. And he's like, "Okay, Jesus, whatever you say." And boom, he's out of there. And he restores the boy. So that's interesting. So I wonder if Luke is playing with that, saying like the disciples are so clueless, they are not listening to Jesus. But the only one who does is the demon. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And then finally, our passage from the Narrative Lectionary concludes with 37 to 45. And so everyone was amazed at all he was doing. And he said to his disciples, "Let these words sink into your ears." He's like, "Okay, guys, listen to me. Read my lips. I am going to die. Are you listening to me?" Well, no, they're not. They did not understand this saying. And Jesus has to go to Jerusalem, and he has to die. And so as I think through this story this time around, I'm left with this question: what is glory? And I think that's where I'm going with my sermon, because, when you think about what is it that we really are after, and like, why do we follow Jesus? Is it because we want, the big payoff? Like, I just want to go to heaven when I die, or I want people to think I'm really awesome in some way. Or are we actually willing to follow Jesus, which means to give up our life for the sake of the other, for the sake of the world? So anyway, that is my visual commentary on Luke chapter 9, verses 21 through 45. I hope you found this helpful, and we'll see you next time.